Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Rise to Thrive, Achieving a Transformed and Equitable Education System. My name is Maddie Sims, and I am a director at Columbia Law School's Center for Public Research and Leadership, or CPRL, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon session. As folks are joining, CPRL is so grateful that you are able to join us this afternoon. We have a really wonderful panel assembled to share with you all more about what Rise to Thrive looks like in action. You'll have a chance to meet our panelists in just a minute or two, but before we kick off the session in just a minute, we have a couple of administrative details to review. Throughout today's session, please feel free to place any and all questions in the Q&A box. We will devote the final portion of our time together to respond to audience questions. This webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be emailed to all participants that have registered. We encourage you to share the recording with other members of your team and network who may be interested in learning more and engaging in this work going forward. With that said, I'm going to kick us off and introduce CPRL for those of you who may not be familiar with our work. CPRL is an education research and policy center housed at Columbia Law School with a dual mission. One component of our mission is focused on training the next generation of education sector leaders really committed to advancing educational equity. We do this by bringing together a cross-disciplinary team of students from law, business, policy, education, and data science programs across the country to participate in both rigorous coursework and client-facing project work. Over the course of the semester, students have the opportunity to learn from members of the CPRL team, learn from our diverse partners, and learn from one another. The other part of CPRL's mission focuses on supporting its clients and partners, which range from state departments of ed to school districts and charter networks to nonprofits and foundations working to advance educational equity, especially for students in communities that have been traditionally underserved. In all of our work, which we'll talk about today, community and family participation and collaborative problem solving are central, which helps ensure the solutions that we co-create with partners are both sustainable and promote lasting change. And so I know the topic of lasting change has been on a lot of our minds lately for so many of us, particularly members of the Black and Brown communities. Bearing witness to the recent trial stemming from the killing of Mr. Floyd has been an emotionally depleting and traumatic experience, and really a powerful reminder of all the work that remains to be done to achieve true justice. Our Rise to Thrive work and vision for education transformation is one small component of the structural change needed over the coming months and years. It is our hope that today's conversation will give us all a reason to recommit ourselves, as well as the organizations that we're a part, to the mission of building an education system that prepares every child of every race, every background, and every ability to thrive both in school and in life. With that said, I am so excited to introduce you to our really incredible group of panelists whose work continues to inspire me and my colleagues and who have generously taken the time to join us today. I'm going to start by asking Dr. Elizabeth Chu to kick us off.
Hi, thank you so much, Maddie. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Liz Chu, I'm the Executive Director at CPRL. I'm an educator, a social science researcher by training, and also a public school parent.
Thank you, Liz. Annalie, are you able to chime in next?
I have to say good evening, everyone, and greetings from Finland. It's 10 p.m. here today. I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon of yours. I work at the innovation unit at the Finnish National Agency for Education, which is the government agency under the Ministry of Education and Culture. I have a long background in education and working at the administration, but also as a teacher and a principal previously. And I've got my master's in education.
Well, thank you so much for joining, and especially given the time difference, so appreciative. Dr. Reed, are you able to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Charlene Reed. I'm the founder and CEO of Excellence Community Schools. I have public charter schools in Bronx, New York, and also in Stamford, Connecticut, with soon another charter school will be opening in Norwalk, Connecticut. Thank you for having me join this panel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you join us today. Carrie, are you able to introduce yourself next and share a little bit about how NPU has worked with CPRL?
Yes, my name is Carrie Rodriguez, and my most important job is being Matthew, Miles, and David's mama. I am the elected president of the National Parents Union. We are an organization with more than 500 affiliates in all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, reaching 15 million families across the United States. And we have been in partnership for quite some time with CPRL, talking about parent engagement, what parents need, what they want, and what they're looking for in reimagining education. So we are very honored to be here and honored to be in partnership with all of you. And we thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited that you're able to join us. Last but certainly not least, Jenna, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. My name is Jenna Yuan. I am a current first-year student at Columbia, as well as the Director of Communications at Student Voice, which is a national student-led nonprofit that works to advocate on issues of education equity and to amplify and advance the mission of Student Voice in schools. And Student Voice has worked with CPRL in the past on resources for high school students navigating education during this very difficult time to be in high school. I know myself, because I just graduated last year. So I'm really appreciative and excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenna. And thank you again to our full group of panelists. We are so appreciative to have such a wonderful group of partners to learn from in this work. And so just to help orient us, you should see here on your screen a brief agenda. We are going to start by providing some background on the research that led to Rise to Thrive. We will then share more about the vision itself, including its guiding principles and an overview of how systems can really seize this moment of disruption to implement meaningful transformation that advances educational equity. We will then bring in our wonderful group of panelists to share more about what families and students need in this moment and how systems and communities they are a part of are already implementing many of Rise to Thrive's guiding principles. During this time, we'll also answer some questions that come in from listeners, and so please do feel free to use the Q&A box, as I mentioned at the start. Finally, we'll wrap up with an invitation to join, including discussion of what the next phase of this work will entail. So let's dive in. Liz, I'm hoping that you can share with listeners a bit more about CPRL's research and the many months and many conversations that led to the creation of Rise to Thrive.
Thank you so much, Maddie. So at CPRL, we are really focused with working with people who are closest to the point of impact to figure out how to address entrenched and pressing problems and to advance equity-focused systems change. So what this means is that since the pandemic hit, we've worked really closely with students, families, teachers, community members, and education leaders to do a couple of things. The first is to support learning day to day. And we've done that with organizations like Student Voice and NPU, who we're so happy to have here. And the second is to learn about both the forced and unforced innovations and family demands that people have engaged in over the past year that might lead to a more equitable education system. To do that, we've engaged in hundreds of conversations, interviews, and focus groups, including, again, a number that happened in partnership with NPU, the organization that Carrie leads, and Student Voice, which Jenna helps lead. And over the course of those conversations, we've been so inspired by the collective ingenuity of students, caregivers, educators, and the extent to which everyone with whom we spoke over the course of the past year really believes that this pandemic and this moment of racial reckoning is an opportunity to address deep structural inequities in our schools. We've been asking ourselves over the course of this research what a system would look like if it centered families and students, and how might we design a system that prepares every child of every race and background to thrive in school and in life. We do see this moment as, some say, a once in a generation, perhaps because of my life, I will say once in a lifetime opportunity to address the question of broad scale change, not just theoretically, but also in practice. We see a number of reasons why this is the moment to go big. The first is about families. Families have a level of transparency into the education that they've never had before. And students, families, and educators and leaders have this sense of urgency, flexibility, and agency that's driven both by necessity and crisis. With the walls of the home down and the walls of the school down, families have taken control because they had to, something that a bunch of folks have been trying to engineer top down for decades, but that's happened now bottom up necessarily in a matter of months. The second big reason is that educators and education systems have also innovated at an unprecedented level. And this type of innovation is not just restricted to instruction or the instructional core. In the span of a year, these systems have experienced a half-decade or more of operational and technological revolution. And where the system is working at this moment, there's another type of innovation going on, and that's that system leaders and educators have learned how to partner with families at a level unheard of in the history of public education. A third big thing is that students, families, educators, leaders, everyone with whom we spoke wants change. We are in the midst of this crucial and widespread racial reckoning. People want to root out inequity, particularly race-based inequity, and they don't want to return to the pre-pandemic normal, a normal in which far too many students and families based on zip code alone were denied opportunities to learn and to thrive.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm really excited to dive into the vision itself. One of the important aspects of Rise to Thrive, I know, is that it is principle driven. Can you talk listeners through the guiding principles that this work is really built upon?
Yeah, and it's something that we decided to do because it mattered so much to students, families, leaders, and teachers, is to be really clear on what are the things that are our touchstones that's going to guide this work. And so from those conversations, we articulated these 5 principles. First, to focus on equity to reach equality and justice. Second, to see learning as the constant and everything else as the variable, particularly operations, instruction, and time. Third is a focus on democratic participation and partnership with families, students, and community members. Fourth is a focus on effective practices, not best practices, to drive student learning. And I will say this is one that we've gotten a lot of questions around. And what I will say is here we're talking about the fact that so many visions propose one solution for all schools just because it's worked in a place. What we are trying to push toward is this idea that there is not a silver bullet solution to which we should look for. Instead, you need to figure out what works in your context, in your time and place, and then how to constantly improve upon that. And the last is that student opportunity and learning must traverse traditional boundaries. The idea that zip code alone should not determine opportunity. We need to leverage the power of technology, the power of collaboration. We need to provide students opportunities to learn, and it can't be restricted to the 4 walls of their school. The other thing to say about these principles is that each one on its own is important, but the thing that I think is really important to see is how they all work together. So if you just start with the first 2, beginning with equity, which is the anchor of our work, is to focus on equity to reach equality and justice. On a broad scale, you could understand the way the current education system is built currently is a system around equality of inputs. And because we know that so many of the most crucial inputs for education are hard to measure, a lot of that focus on equality of inputs is a focus on those things that are only weakly related to student learning, well-being, and life outcomes. So what we're suggesting here is a really, really deep reorientation, one where the entire system is governed based on student need and a commitment to improving students' life chances, which means providing equity of opportunity and equity of quality of service so that there is equality and justice in terms of the outcomes that matter: student learning, student well-being, student thriving. And that's where the second principle comes in. Focusing on this equality of learning, well-being, and other outcomes makes you adjust the services that come before so that your operations, your instruction, your time, all of those have to be adjusted accordingly so that all children can have equal chances of thriving in life. And this type of education service delivery that's tailored and equitable, it requires participation with those who know our kids and their cultures best, the students themselves, their families, their communities. And that's where you see the third principle come into the picture.
Thanks so much, Liz, for sharing all of that context. I know that individualized student support is really a crucial component of Rise to Thrive. Can you share with our listeners today a bit more about how each student is really meaningfully supported and really how the whole child is supported in this new system?
Yeah, Well, we knew it wasn't, even though the principles were important, we knew it wasn't enough to just say what those principles were and just define them, but that we had to start to talk about what those principles looked like in action. And so we spent a lot of time mapping what students, families, educators, leaders want with successful models from around the US and other countries. And that's part of the reason why we're so excited to have Annalie and Dr. Reed here to speak, as they are leaders in two of the systems that we've studied really, really carefully. So one model I will name is the Finland model. And particularly this element of the Finland model that's undiscussed often in the United States, which is their focus on individualized student-centered learning, supported by teams of professionals, often with the involvement of the family. And I know Annalie is going to speak more about that later in today's session. We've also looked at charter schools, private schools, traditional public schools here and in South America that are focused on student agency and individualized whole child education. And I know you'll be hearing Dr. Reed speak about her work at Excellence Community Schools in the ways that they've broken down the four walls of the school to expand learning opportunity and partner really deeply with families and students to bring the types of whole child supports that kids need to thrive. And we've studied this type of model and levels of personalization in traditional district schools as well, including districts like Lindsay Unified School District in California. We've also looked at a number of international school models here in the US. And out of all of this research grew this idea of the RISE team, a team that is tasked with realizing individualized student-centered education, RISE, so that each child can thrive. And then figuring out from that model, from a model that's driven by meeting students' needs in this individualized way, what is the school model and what is the system model that would need to surround it so that you can do this for every single child in a system. So this team would consist of student, family, teacher, community support coordinator, and others, perhaps additional specialists, for example, if you're talking about students with disabilities or other needs. This team would engage in a collaborative student-centered planning process, a collaborative improvement process, and that team would be attached to a child's home-based school. So whether that school is virtual or physical. And then in partnership, the RISE team would work to create an annual plan for a child. I will say here that we are not thinking about the hyper-legalized, the really compliance or constrictive model of the IEP, but instead, again, hearkening to the professionalized and flexible Finnish model that we've studied. That team would also monitor a student's progress, their learning, their well-being. They'd work together to solve problems as they arrive, and they would document, communicate, and celebrate success. And as part of this planning process, we imagine that they would be really looking at that time as a variable, mode as a variable, operations as a variable, type of instruction as a variable. And one of the flexibilities that you might imagine when thinking about that is the extent to which a child would be participating in virtual school, whether it's full, one or more full virtual days, whether it's a virtual set of programming while they're in a school building, or that could be done elsewhere. And, here we still see schools that would be nested within a home district or charter system or regional groupings of them that would provide oversight as to their primary functioning.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that. I know in a lot of conversations that I've been a part of, folks are really interested to learn more about the student-centered planning and improvement process, and specifically the roles of both teachers and school leaders in this new system. Can you speak briefly a bit about their roles in Rise to Thrive?
Yeah, well, in this model, teachers are facilitators, and I think where we have seen aspects of this model work best, teachers are working in teams, instructional teams and in broader teams, and they're facilitating students' learning experience. They're focusing on students mastering learning standards and meeting their learning goals, and they have resources that really help them do this type of work well. They have standards aligned, culturally responsive and sustaining instructional materials. They use mastery-based assessment practices. A lot of the instructional materials that they use might be tech-enabled to support personalization, as well as to support learning across remote and in-person modalities or across geographies as a whole. And we see school leaders that are creating a school environment that is committed to this type of boundary breaking work, that's committed to a teaming structure and process, that's committed to continuous improvement and collaboration across boundaries.
Great. Well, Liz, I have one more question for you, and then I'm excited to open it up to our additional panelists. Zooming out a bit from the school to the district level, can you talk a bit about the role for the district?
Yeah, and it does shift. Again, here we're thinking about what does a system look like when it's governed around teams of folks designed to meet students' needs. So the system here moves away from things like prescribing daily schedules, curriculum, scopes and sequences, things like that, and instead really focuses on specifying standards, focuses on mobilizing resources and supports, focuses on helping others achieve economies of scale and being a direct provider of services where when they do that, it does allow systems to achieve economies of scales and being a facilitator and source of transparency. Again, making sure that people have a deep and real understanding of exactly what's happening in the education system so that we can improve upon it and do better.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for all of that helpful overview. So let's go ahead and close the slides so we can engage in a discussion with our group of panelists. Really so excited for all of our panelists to share their perspectives and the ways that they have seen these principles in action in both the school systems and communities they are a part of. So Carrie, I'd love to start with you. We know that you have a really strong sense of families' experiences over this past year, along with the challenges that parents and other caretakers have faced. Coming out of this pandemic, what are families expecting and really demanding from schools so that all families, especially those that have been traditionally underserved, really can better support their children both next year and in years to come?
So before I answer your question, I want to talk to you very quickly about how we know what I'm about to tell you. Often parent advocacy groups and parent activists like myself will come on and tell you an anecdote. The National Parents Union is very different. We like to quantify what we see on the ground. So we go out and we ask the questions of parents across the nation. So when the pandemic started, we embarked on a project where we were polling parents and have been asking parents these exact questions and the questions of the day. And as things were coming up on a wide variety of topics, we remained in community and conversation with them to ask them and take the temperature of American families so that it wasn't just our anecdotes on the ground, which are incredibly powerful and necessary, but we know you folks like data too. So we wanted to make sure that we could actually give you something that's not just qualitative, but quantitative and say it with authority. That way you can't dismiss us either. It's really hard to blow us off when we've got the data and the facts. So what we have done, again, monthly surveys in conversation with parents, asking them whether or not they thought that this moment where we had an unprecedented disruption of the status quo in education, whether or not they viewed this as also not just a challenge, but an opportunity to reimagine education. And I got to tell you, we've asked this question every single month since last April. And the message is very clear. By a 2-to-1 margin, American families, regardless of geography, regardless of demographics, intersectionalities, they all say unequivocally, again, by a 2-to-1 margin, that this is the moment to reimagine education. So I think this message, this work that we're all doing together is right on time because that's really what parents want. So when we ask the question, when you think about reimagining education and re-entering schools or re-engaging with systems, and we're reimagining in this moment, what does that actually mean? What do you want to see? And the numbers are very clear. Again, this was not a close call for American families. They told us that 87% of them are looking for providing all students with laptops and tablets and high-speed internet. 87% saying providing counseling and mental health support for students and staff. And we also double clicked on that at one point, talking about school resource officers, which is another story for another day, but very important to engagement with the community and understanding our context. But number 3, which I think is critically important, is the fact that 86% of families say that they want every single school to provide their child with an individualized learning plan for each student based on their specific needs. And even just asking this question, the way we put this poll together is we asked parents, like, what should we be asking American families? And our special ed family said, this is what we do, and we create IEPs, and this is what we're going to need in the future. And the idea has really caught fire. Again, 86% of American families telling us that this is really important. So I don't know how you argue with that.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. That is really appreciate you sharing that information, and so appreciative that NPU is able to gather this really important both qualitative and quantitative information, as you noted. So, Dr. Reed, I'd love to bring you into this conversation, staying on the topic of families. CPRL was first really drawn to study and learn from the excellence community because we heard that you were doing things a little bit differently, that school-family partnership is not siloed or an afterthought, but instead really a driver of student learning and growth. Can you share a bit what school-family partnership entails at Excellence and how you see some of Excellence's practices coming up in our conversation today?
Thank you. So I will preface what I'm saying with, I think our organization had a very strong foundation in going into the pandemic. A lot of the things that I'll share with you today, it's really part of our DNA. And so even though we did suffer all the ails that everyone did in the entire world with, going from in-person learning to the spring where we were all remote and then figuring out in the fall how we were going to reopen, I felt like our organization was poised to be able to deal with it because we had already kind of established in our name, Excellence Community Schools, that we are a family driven model out the outset. And so how do you have a family driven model? You have to hire folks who actually care, love, will fight and win for families and students. And folks always ask me, why do you always talk about winning? It's just, as anyone knows who has children, you fight and you will push to make sure that your child receives the best. You don't want to lose. So there is this idea of winning for your child. And so we always look for staff members across the entire board. So it's not just the principal or the teachers, it's our front office staff, it's our custodial staff. So every single stakeholder, also board members, do you care? Do you love? Are you going to fight? And are you going to win for students and families who have traditionally either been disenfranchised or they're in under-resourced neighborhoods or low income or whatever the ills of society plague us? Are you going to care, love, and fight and win? So once you have those folks on your team, you've built a very strong, solid foundation to be able to execute a family-driven model. And so what does that really mean? It means, for example, one of our first interactions with families, we have what we call a family chat. And with that family chat, it's not intended just to go over rules and policies and procedures, even though we do go over that because parents want to know, what does it mean to be a parent or a scholar in an excellent school? So we do go over that. We go over a handbook, and it's almost like an onboarding, but that's half of it. The other half is now we're about to participate in a long-term relationship. And so we got to figure out, and we got to establish the rules and how we're going to treat each other and how we're going to be with this new family that we've decided to form. And so with that, school leaders, teachers, all staff are held accountable to that family model, monitoring students' growth, making sure the family is on board as far as like the students' performance, their learning plans, how to advocate for their scholars, actually partnering in some of the decisions that we have to make for a scholar's learning plan. And then additionally, working with teachers around their biases. So even though I started off by saying we're going to hire the person that cares and loves and fights and wins for a scholar, sometimes in execution, you kind of see some things that need to be retooled. And so usually that is a bias. You have to challenge those. You have to sometimes shift from like a deficit-based approach sometimes to an assets-based approach. And so keeping the lines of communication open, making sure there's ongoing feedback, understanding that you will disagree, understanding that you will agree, you will laugh, you will cry, you will go through every emotional state, but isn't that what families go through, right? So if you have that strong family driven model established, and then you're able to like commit to be able to deal with the ups and downs, because our scholars are with us from kindergarten to 8th grade. And what a scholar looks like at 5 years old is completely different than what that scholar looks like when they're 13 or 14. And so how is this connected to Rise to Thrive? And what we're going to talk about today is I think it fits perfectly into the Rise teams for the students when you're establishing those plans, because that's something that we do at Excellence. And it really came alive during the pandemic in the spring, where we were working with families, making sure we're doing wellness checks, making sure that we were meeting all of their needs. And I think that is an important aspect that the Rise to Thrive model has that I think fits perfectly to how we function in our organization.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Reed, for sharing all that. And I'll just add quickly that I had the privilege of speaking with a dozen or so families at Excellence as part of our research efforts. And really so many of them highlighted the family chat that you just noted as really an opportunity to engage meaningfully. And I loved how you phrased it, really join the Excellence family and know that they'll be supported going forward. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that today. Jenna, I'm wanting to turn it over to you. And over the past year, we know, of course, that students have faced countless challenges, but we also know that there have been innovations, small and large, that have really been positive and empowered students in various ways. Based on your work with Student Voice, can you share some of the innovations, small and large, over the past year that have really benefited students and that students want schools and educators to really carry forward post-pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like in the classroom, speaking as someone who was briefly in the classroom, like back in 2020, in spring in my last year of high school when COVID-19 first hit kind of the US, and also now like working with Student Voice and getting to hear students' experiences from across the country, is that this has been a big moment for the principle of democratic participation in the classroom, especially in the Rise to Thrive vision, especially for students. We saw when the pandemic kind of first hit, this really intuitive kind of partnership building between teachers and students and families of, educators going to students and families and asking what would work for you during this time. And that sort of partnership model, I think, has been really exciting, and to see some of the innovations that have come out of that in terms of student voice and agency in the classroom has been great. So students that I've gotten to speak to, and also from some of the research done for the high school resource guide with CPRL, have said that things like the option to determine their own schedules in a more flexible fashion, deciding when they want to do specific sets of assignments and getting to go to class in a more loose schedule has been really beneficial to them to get to participate in things that they're interested in, as well as enroll in virtual programming that they think would benefit them. And they also say that like additional opportunities for like individualized learning through technology has been excellent. I'm getting to do assignments online asynchronously that again are tailored to what's happening in the world and their interests, as well as an increased focus on things that should have always been a focus, but now have kind of come to the forefront, such as mental health, and the effects of racial injustices in the classroom have also been really beneficial to students. And overall, the increased flexibility and just the solicitation of feedback from students is something that has been really exciting to see innovating during this time, and hopefully is something that's retained after we move out of this phase of education.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And I'll say that it's been so wonderful for us at CPRL to have the chance to learn from you and other members of Student Voice and really witness the ways in which you are all really pushing educators forward to embrace more student agency as well. So really, really just want to thank you for sharing that. So Annalie, I'm excited to bring you into the conversation. So we just heard Jenna share a bit about opportunities for really individualized tailored support, as well as this focus on whole child mental and emotional health. As Liz previewed earlier, we have studied the Finnish education model and in building the Rise to Thrive vision. Are you able to share a bit more about Finland's approach to individualized whole child support and what components of the Finnish model you see in Rise to Thrive?
I'm very pleased to share that. And first of all, I have to say that Finland has been very successful in learning outcomes in international comparisons during the past years. And one of the reasons I find is that we've always taken good care of children with needs, whether the needs are social, emotional, or learning difficulties, great or small, whether it is behavior or any depression or any issues that the child has that prevents him or her from learning. And we've paid a lot of attention to early intervention because we believe that if we can prevent diversified and more serious problems when they rise as small problems, we can have a good support and kind of guide the children to have a good life and to fulfill their potential. The support is provided by teachers, of course. The concern can be brought up by parents or the student himself or the teacher or the principal, but we also need multi-professional teams. We have psychologists, school nurses, special needs teachers, counselors working in each school. And also the principal is usually leading this group of professionals that then individually is looking at the child's situation and deciding who is going to go forward with the family and give the support. They identify the problem, they plan together, they take care of the implementation and monitoring. And case by case, including learning plan, individual learning plan, they support this journey so that every child can flourish, really. And this is written in the legislation in Finland, that every child has a right to support, general support, additional support, and intensified support to the level that she or he needs. I was very happy to discuss this Rise and Thrive approach, and I also find that here we find the student-centered planning and process. And you also have stated that you will have teams that include the student and the family, teacher, family support coordinator, doctors, counselors, and so on. So this multi-professional type of work will increase in Finland as well, although we've had it for a long time and it's proven to be very beneficial and very productive as well. And what I find especially interesting is the emphasis on families and the students, that we really have a chance to listen to what they are saying. And the real focus is on collaboration. That begins with sharing the information that's being needed and so that it's transparent.
Thank you so much, Annalie, for sharing that. Dr. Reed, I'd love to circle back to you for the next question. So part of individualized student-centered support that Annalie and others were just talking about is helping students identify and explore their interests, some of which might, of course, be outside of the core academic subjects. It might be art, music, robotics, just to name a few. How has Excellence taken advantage of the opportunities of virtual programming over the past year to really think expansively about learning opportunities and really give your scholars the chance to explore their varied interests?
So in the spring, we kind of had a different approach with our scholars. So we didn't have live instruction as we were trying to figure out how do we do this synchronous instruction which we know we're probably going to have to do in the fall. And so since we had this case model approach where we had our entire staff with a caseload of scholars that they would check in with daily and provide tutoring and one-to-one support, it also included our teachers who were art teachers and music teachers and all of our specialists. And some feedback that I got was that, you know, for 3 months, they felt deprived of being able to actually, you know, sing with scholars and paint and do art. So I said, okay, we cannot do this. If the teachers are feeling deprived, we know the kids are feeling deprived. So we got to figure this out. So during the summer, we implemented a pilot where we created an arts program to see how many kids would actually participate in virtual programming that, you know, with painting and cartooning and architecture and dance and tap and poetry and storytelling. Like we had so many different, we had a menu. And what we discovered is that our scholars loved it. And I was so surprised at like the demand of how the scholars really loved it, the teachers loved it. And I said, I think we could really pull this off in the fall, but how do we do this with 2,500 students? And it's also going to require us to completely change our model, which scared everybody. And I was like, but why are you guys scared? Like the model has already been changed. We're at home. We're not in the school. So what are you holding on to? And so we changed our schedule, and we have an artistic director that we worked with. And we said, we're in New York City. We're in the home of Broadway and performers and artists, and we know Broadway is closed. We know folks are not, and they're not doing concerts. They're not actually participating in their craft. So what can we do? So we partnered together, and we have about 40 professional working artists, along with our entire staff, where we have what we call Club Excellence. And with Club Excellence, it's completely virtual. So even teachers who are in the building, they are working virtually with students in the building to make sure that we are staying within our CDC requirements of cohorting and everything. So we have this massive 1 to 3 o'clock, our entire organization is participating in all those different subjects that we spoke about, which is part of our foundation too. Like we call them all core subjects. So music is a core subject just as math is. And so it just fit in, and we weren't surprised at how much everyone loves it, to now everyone saying, are we gonna have this when we go back in person? And now we're all like pulling our hair out, trying to figure out, we're really gonna have to change our model. Like we have a different model out now. We cannot go back to what that model was before. And now we have to be able to utilize. And so what I love about this is when I read your Rise to Thrive principle number 5, it totally fits into like kind of like the mindset and the journey that we went on about like, how do we traverse traditional boundaries? How do we get our staff, our families, our kids to say, I'm going to learn how to tap dance and I don't need the instructor in front of me, but I'm going to set up my room to make sure that I can do this. It also required us to send materials out or to give parents a list like, okay, this art class is coming up the next trimester. And so the scholar needs X, Y, and Z. Let us know if you need help with the materials and things like that. So it does require a lot of planning, but let me tell you, it's so worth it. And so that Rise to Thrive principle, number 5, like student opportunity and learning must traverse traditional boundaries. I think that that's crucial right now, breaking down those traditional walls, because not only did we have to break down the traditional walls, we had to create this virtual space, but the walls are actually in your head. Because that's what I found out. Like, it was kind of like, you cannot teach a kid how to paint virtually. Yes, you can. You know, you can't do this type of movement in African dance. Yes, you can. And so also making sure that the parents were engaged, because sometimes it's hard to get a 5-year-old to be focused to take a cartooning class. So working with parents as well. So we learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to in the fall being able to go to a new space of learning and actually scheduling the Scholars Day. Like it's because when you do this, it means that you have to de-emphasize other things, which can be shocking for folks. So.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited by so much of what you shared, and I particularly love what you noted towards the end about breaking down walls in people's minds, as well as those physical walls. I think that so much of it is about shifting mindsets and really an openness to thinking about ensuring equitable opportunity in ways that we may not have worked 6 months ago, 12 months ago. So thank you so much, Dr. Reed. Carrie, I'd love to circle back to you. And one thing that we've been so really inspired by over the past 6 months, or 9 months, a year, is really the opportunity to learn about all the creative ways that families have been supporting learning throughout the pandemic. And so based on your conversations and experiences in work, what have these creative approaches to learning really revealed about how children learn best? And what are you hearing during today's conversation that's really responsive to that?
Well, this conversation is making me happy and sad at the same time. I don't know if I want to try to enroll in Dr. Reed's school or move to Finland. It's one of those. Something's got to give. I'm really excited about this. But honestly, we have learned a lot and we've had to by necessity, because we can't all go to Dr. Reed's school and we can't all make it over to Finland. And these are things, what they're both talking about are things that families want. We unfortunately are in a society right now, especially the constituency I represent. Like my organization is mainly poor, Black, and brown. We have people who are in the struggle, doing the best they can just to survive. So number one is my kid safe? Do I have a safe place to live? Do I have food to eat? Then we talk about education. And sometimes there's just not enough hours in the day to get that engaged and to do what you need to do in the American education system to be able to get that innovation and that tailored experience you need for your child. And it's not, the fault of parents and families. It's just the way the grind is set up against us, and we're always on this hamster wheel. So unless we're able to get access to a beautiful opportunity like what Dr. Reed is talking about, what she provides for her families, the system is just stacked against us. But we did have an unprecedented moment. Necessity is the mother of invention. And just like Dr. Reed was talking about, if you didn't have access to that kind of support coming from your school, mamas across this country were going to figure it out. And frankly, there was a period of grace that we extended, that we said, okay, it's a pandemic. We've never seen this before. We got to give our traditional public schools a break. But then there came a breaking point where people were like, the system doesn't have this, and I'm not going to let my baby fall through the cracks. I got to come up with something different. And out of this beautiful, trouble came, some beautiful outcomes that we were able to explore. And we were blessed to be able to extend almost $1 million in pandemic pod grants to, frankly, folks that never get the resources, that never get to homeschool, that never have the time or the capacity or the resources, and frankly, didn't have the courage to do it because they've been beaten down and told they couldn't do it. And all these dreams we had in our head about what we wanted education to be for our kids, well, we saw that the education system traditionally didn't have it for us. So we actually had the opportunity to create it ourselves. So when we opened up our Meet the Moment grants and said, you know what, we've got this money and we're going to put the resources in the hands of the people closest to the pain. We got flooded with ideas from parents across the nation. Beautiful ideas. I wish I had enough money to fund every single one, but we only got to about $1 million, and that got us to about 50 pods. And what they came up with was extraordinary, because we started to reawaken and recognize we are our kids' first teachers. And we did have visions around what we wanted education to be, and now we could create it. And so we saw, we funded the Black Homeschooling Mamas Union in Chicago, which was extraordinary because now you had culturally competent curriculum being intertwined with traditional curriculum, and they were able to collaborate and co-create this beautiful experience for Black children in Chicago, which was envisioned by the parents on the ground. They got to add, layers of financial curriculum in addition to cultural curriculum, in addition to bilingual education, setting up systems educational environments that were right for our kids. I was really touched by this idea around the deficit mindset, because it's really dangerous in this moment. There's a lot of conversation out there saying, oh my God, our children are lost. This is going to be a lost generation. Oh my God, they're wounded, they're broken. Our kids are bright and beautiful and resilient. And if we speak that to them, that's what they're going to take in. They're going to internalize that. So what I saw our mamas do is step up and say, no, I'm going to fight for this. And then I'm going to reimagine this. And in fact, I'm going to come up with something better, because a lot of our kids thrived in virtual learning. A lot of our kids thrived because they were no longer surrounded by people who didn't love them the way Dr. Reed's folks love their kids. Because often we send our kids into buildings with people who can't stand our kids. And we know that because often we were also sitting in those seats. And I say that as a woman who was expelled from public high school. I know what that feels like. The push out is real in this country. And so the freedom and your opportunity to really learn in an environment that is safe, not just health-wise, but emotionally, and you're free from racism and bullying and all of that burden, it gave some of our kids the opportunity to open their minds and their hearts to what they really wanted to be. So yeah, we can talk about the nuts and bolts of curriculum, but we also have to talk about the environment. And we have to talk about the beautiful opportunity that many of our kids were presented with to just, be free of all of that burden, away from the traditional box that we shove all of our kids in, that frankly, we know doesn't work. Our public education system is one of the very few where we know it doesn't work. The outcomes are not great, but we keep investing in making it bigger and making it more of the same and more of the status quo, because the folks that are running the buildings really like it that way. So again, I think what our parents were able to do is really step into it and be outcomes focused. Like, how do we envision where we want our kids to be, and then reverse engineer what we're doing to actually meet that moment? And parents are very powerful in getting folks focused on that. And I think that's why, I keep pointing to Dr. Reed, but this philosophy around bringing parents in as partners, we're peers, we're grown-ups at the table too. We're I would say the second most important stakeholder, because these are our babies. Our investment doesn't end at graduation day. We're in this for life, long term. And so, we want to be a part of the team. We really want you to succeed. We need you to, but we need you to think outside the box. So that was the unique moment that was presented. And I could give you a million examples of, the incredible things that people were able to bring to the table, because they know their kids best. And whether it's, making sure there were only 3 kids in the pod, because they needed to concentrate, and they know their babies, and this was an opportunity for them to really concentrate or not be bullied. Or, the fact that they wanted all Black girls to be together, and they were going to have a Black women's book club layered on top of the traditional curriculum. They were able to infuse that. And that was really extraordinary, because we saw so many kids across the country start to blossom through that. So I think that was as important a lesson as any that we learned.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for really those inspirational words. I wish we had more time in our webinar, because I want to dive into so many of the things you just mentioned. I know that we are coming to our close, so I think we have time for just 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up. Jenna, I want to bring you back in for a moment, and this relates to actually a question that came in from an audience member, and it's around student agency. And so the question is, I heard you mention student agency. Can you share more about how Rise to Thrive embraces student agency, and how this is responsive to what students are really needing and asking for in this moment?
Yeah, definitely. as like I mentioned before, it really comes down to the idea of like how students are treated in the classroom and like how their voices are valued in terms of like what choice they get, and like what like sort of aspects of control they have over like what they're learning, how they're learning it, and like sort of creating that responsive partnership is what students are really seeking from like their educators. They want to have a say over like specifically like what topics that they're interested in that they would like to go more depth in, or like what strategies are working. Like, do they feel like one specific assignment is maybe not helping their learning as much as like something else would, or like what sort of like schedule even like they would like to be on. That's another thing that we've seen like out of the pandemic has been really flexible for students who, there is a lot of research showing that, maybe making students like get up every morning and be at their desk at like 7 a.m. isn't necessarily the best strategy for learning. And that's something that we've really seen come out of this moment. And so, as Carrie mentioned, the idea of being really close to the ground, of keeping your like ears peeled as an educator for things that students are saying is something that like is, I think, a integral part of the Rise to Thrive vision, and is something that like students are really seeking to be embraced. And another part of it also that I think is really important to flag is the idea of like what students have choice and what students' voices are elevated in the classroom right now is an important thing to discuss when talking about student agency. When you consider your typical like school leadership co-creation models where you have maybe like a student council or an elected student body president, those students often aren't the students who are most affected by inequities in education. So when considering what students' voices are brought to the table, it's important to not only listen to students who maybe like are succeeding in current systems, but the students who are like being subject to inequities are the ones that whose voices are perhaps really important to elevate and listen to. And also the idea of like what choice students have in terms of resource distribution is also very important to mention. Student agency often comes with the ability to choose classes and to choose extracurriculars and things like that. And students who go to schools who are underfunded or who are in low wealth neighborhoods often do not have access to those resources. So that's another key structural obstacle to like the kind of student voice and agency and democratic participation in schools of students that would inhibit like sort of my ideal vision of student voice.
Thank you so much, Jenna. So we just have time for one more question, and I want to bring back Annalie into the conversation for our last question, which is around change management. And so I know that in your role, you think a decent amount about change management and helping to really ready schools, ready systems for real transformation. And as we've been talking about today, a lot of these seeing out and living out these principles in action does require a reimagining of, as Dr. Reed said, some of those walls that we've built up in our minds to really advance student equity and educational equity. Are you able to share a little bit about what guidance you would give to system leaders who really are looking to make this transition from a one-size-fits-all approach toward really a more individualized approach to student support?
First of all, I have to say that sometimes people feel uncomfortable when we start talking about change, and often we think that change means structural things. This past year, this pandemic has taught us all over the world that we live in a very complex world. So then we also need to keep developing all the time and be in the sort of in the situation where we are ready to leave some things behind. And I think we've learned that a crisis can also be an opportunity to do better. And we should stop and think and see what we have learned, despite that this has been a very difficult time everywhere in the world. But I think a change and transformation requires changing mindset. So a leader should create curiosity and have big ears to listen to people so that it can be a kind of a common approach to strive for the change, for a joint vision that has been collaboratively described and found. And basically, I think support from the leader is also support from the leadership team and at all levels of the system. And I think a lot of attention should be paid on the question why. And then after that, it's time to find the means to head further towards the vision, and to evaluate the process, to have a feedback loop, to see what works and what doesn't work. We don't always know what is the right way of doing things, but we just have to experiment and be brave and strive towards the vision. So create curiosity, give positive feedback, and trust one another.
Well, thank you so much. Those are such inspirational words to wrap up our Q&A portion. So I want to thank our panelists again for all of the insights that you were able to share with us today. I want to share one or two closing words and then wrap us up, because I know we're just a minute or so over our allotted time. So I want to mention to everyone that CPRL is preparing to enter really the operationalizing stage and really ready to work alongside partners and system leaders across both the district and charter sectors who are really committed to educational transformation and really committed to developing an innovation implementation plan for the upcoming school year. And so for those of you who have joined us today who are interested in learning more, whether it's offering recommendation on folks we should connect with or partnering directly, please feel free to reach out to the CPRL team. We will put our email addresses in the Zoom chat box in case you don't have it. And so this hour together has really flown by. I do want to again thank our amazing group of panelists for taking time to join this afternoon. Thank you to all of our listeners who took the time to really thoughtfully engage with us today. We hope that you heard something today that inspired you, and we really hope that this is the start rather than the end of our conversation. As we mentioned at the start, we'll be circulating a recording of today's webinar to all who registered. And if you're so inclined, we would be grateful if you can share the Rise to Thrive vision with others in your network. We're really excited to bring additional folks on board who are really committed to leveraging this moment of disruption. So thank you again, both for joining and for all the work that you are doing on behalf of students, on behalf of families, and on behalf of communities. We really look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. Take care.